In the mountains of Northern California, nestled deep in the Sierra Nevada, there is a small, forgotten resort town called Keddie. It barely appears on a map. A handful of cabins, a general store, dense forests stretching in every direction. The kind of place where people came to escape the world. But in the spring of 1981, the world came crashing in. And what happened inside Cabin 28 has never truly been explained. This is one of the most disturbing unsolved murders in American history. This is the story of the Keddie Cabin Murders. Keddie, California. Population: barely a few dozen permanent residents. It sits at an elevation of over 3,000 feet, surrounded by ponderosa pines, along the North Fork of the Feather River. For most of the 20th century, it functioned as a modest mountain resort, a stopping point for families looking for cheap accommodations and quiet weekends away from city life. By 1981, the resort had seen better days. Most of the cabins were rented long-term by low-income families who had nowhere else to go. The plumbing was old. The walls were thin. Neighbors could hear everything. Glenna Sue Sharp was 36 years old. She was a mother of 5 children: Sheila, 14, John, 15, Tina, 12, Rick, 10, and little Greg, just 5 years old. Sue had recently separated from her husband and moved herself and her children into Cabin 28 at the Keddie Resort. It wasn't much. A small, simple structure with a living room, a kitchen, and a few cramped bedrooms. But it was theirs. By all accounts, Sue was warm, kind, a devoted mother doing her best in difficult circumstances. Her neighbors liked her. Her children were lively and social. And despite the poverty, despite the struggling single-mother existence, Cabin 28 had a life in it. On the evening of Friday, April 10, 1981, that life was about to be extinguished. That night, Sue's eldest daughter Sheila was spending the night at a neighboring cabin, Cabin 27, with a friend. The rest of the family was home. Also present that night were 2 guests: John Sharp's friend, 14-year-old Dana Wingate, who had come to spend the weekend, and possibly, though investigators would later debate this, 1 or 2 other visitors. The children went to bed. The night settled over the mountain. No one heard screaming. No one called for help. By morning, for people would be dead. The morning of Saturday, April 11th, 1981, Sheila Sharp walked back from Cabin 27 to her home at Cabin 28. It was a short walk, just steps between the 2 structures. She opened the door, and she found something no 14-year-old child should ever have to see. Her mother, Sue Sharp, lay on the living room floor. She was dead, bound with electrical tape and rope. The violence done to her body was catastrophic, far beyond what any single weapon could account for. She had been beaten, stabbed, and strangled. Beside her was the body of John Sharp, 15 years old, her son. He had died the same way. Nearby was the body of Dana Wingate, John's 14-year-old friend. He had only come for the weekend. All 3 had been bound together. All 3 bore signs of extended, brutal violence. The scene was so savage that investigators who arrived that morning, hardened law enforcement officers, were visibly shaken. Sheila screamed. Neighbors rushed over. Someone called the police. And then came the second horror. Her younger siblings, Rick, Greg, and Tina, had been in the back bedroom when all of this happened. Rick and Greg were found there alive, traumatized, unharmed physically. They had either slept through the entire ordeal, or had been too terrified to move. But Tina, 12-year-old Tina Sharp, was gone. Her bed had been slept in. Her shoes were still in the cabin. She had vanished. Plumas County Sheriff's deputies swarmed the scene. The investigation had begun. But even in those first chaotic hours, the errors were already starting. From the very beginning, the Keddie investigation was plagued by problems. The crime scene, Cabin 28, was not properly secured in the early hours. Neighbors and onlookers walked through before the area was fully cordoned off. Potential evidence may have been contaminated or moved before investigators could properly catalog it. The lead investigators from the Plumas County Sheriff's Office worked a rural jurisdiction with limited resources and limited experience with crimes of this magnitude. Major crimes units from state agencies were not immediately brought in. And the decisions made in those first critical hours, the hours that matter most in any homicide investigation, would haunt this case for decades. The murder weapons were never definitively recovered from the scene. Investigators believe the killers used at least two distinct implements, a hammer and a knife, both of which were taken from the cabin itself. Yet despite extensive searching of the surrounding forest and grounds, neither weapon was ever conclusively identified and recovered. Witnesses were interviewed in the days that followed. Neighbors reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles and unknown individuals in the area around the time of the murders. Pair of men, reportedly seen near Cabin 28 that night, were identified as persons of interest. Their names were known. They were questioned. But no arrests were made. No charges were filed. Over the following months, the investigation stalled. Tips came in and were followed up on or weren't. Persons of interest came and went. Theories multiplied. And all the while, 12-year-old Tina Sharp remained missing. Where was Tina? That question would not be answered for 3 years. In 1984, 3 years after the murders, a partial human skull was found in Butte County, California, approximately 50 miles from Keddie. Dental records confirmed what the family had feared. It was Tina Sharp. She had been murdered. Her remains were later found to bear evidence consistent with homicidal violence. She had been taken from that cabin on the night of April 10th, and she had never made it out alive. But how her skull ended up 50 miles from Keddie was never explained. And then came the next blow. The skull, the single most important piece of physical evidence in Tina's case, disappeared from the evidence lockup. Gone. No one could explain how. No one was held accountable. Over the decades, investigators and amateur sleuths have focused on a handful of key suspects. The most consistently named are two men, a man known in case documents as Bo Bubaid, and a man named Martin Smart. Martin Smart was a resident of the Keddie Resort at the time of the murders. He lived in a nearby cabin with his wife Marilyn and his stepchildren. He and Sue Sharp were acquaintances. He had been in the area on the night in question. In the years following the murders, Smart made statements to various people that raised serious questions. He reportedly told a therapist things that, in hindsight, could be interpreted as admissions of involvement. He moved away from the area shortly after the murders. He died in 2004, never charged, never prosecuted. Bo Bubaid was Smart's friend and companion. He was present in Keddie around the time of the murders. Like Smart, he was questioned and released. He died in 1988, also never charged. After Smart's death, a note, reportedly written by Smart, was discovered. In the note, he appeared to confess to having been present during the murders. The note referenced events consistent with the crime. Investigators studied it. Forensic experts analyzed it. But a handwritten note from a dead man, absent corroborating physical evidence, is not enough to close a case. Other theories have circulated over the years. Some investigators have suggested that multiple perpetrators were involved, that this was not simply a two-man crime, but potentially involved others in the community who were never identified. Some have suggested the motive was a dispute, a confrontation that escalated horrifically. Others have pointed to the drug culture present in the remote mountain community at the time. But theories are not answers, and answers have never come. In the years following the murders, Cabin 28 sat largely abandoned. The Keddie Resort itself declined further and further. The property changed hands. The buildings deteriorated. Nature slowly began to reclaim the grounds. For decades, Cabin 28 stood, weathered, boarded, scarred, as a silent monument to what had happened inside it. True crime enthusiasts, journalists, and curious visitors made the pilgrimage to photograph it, to stand in front of it, to try to feel something of what that night must have been like. In 2004, the cabin was finally demolished. The structure was gone, but the questions remained. Some family members and advocates had hoped that the demolition might yield new physical evidence. Investigators combed through the debris. Nothing definitive was found. It is easy in true crime to become consumed by the details of the crime itself, the evidence, the suspects, the investigative failures. But at the center of this story are real people, real lives shattered. Sheila Sharp, the 14-year-old girl who walked through that door on April 11, 1981, never recovered from what she found. She carried that image for the rest of her life. In interviews over the years, she spoke of survivor's guilt, of grief that never fully passed, of a childhood violently stolen. Rick and Greg Sharp, the younger boys who were in that back bedroom, grew up in the shadow of that night. Greg was 5 years old. He has almost no memory of his mother. What he has instead is a lifetime of knowing how she died. Tina Sharp never had the chance to grow up at all. For decades, the surviving family members have pleaded with authorities for answers. They have hired private investigators. They have spoken to journalists. They have kept the story alive when official investigations went cold. In 2016, Plumas County authorities announced that the case had been reopened, citing new investigative leads. Investigators recovered what was described as new physical evidence, though specific details were not publicly released. The case was re-examined with fresh eyes and modern forensic tools. As of this recording, no arrests have ever been made. The case officially remains open. If you or someone you know has information about the Keddie Cabin Murders, the Plumas County Sheriff's Office continues to accept tips related to this case. If you found this story compelling, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. True crime is not entertainment, it is memory. And the least we can do for victims like Sue, John, Dana, and Tina is remember them. We'll see you next time.